Welcome back to another reading and correcting. With me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch and YouTube. And if you want to support me, that is on Ream Stories. Today we are doing Chapter 2 of The Captain's Heart. Jeremy walked through the hall of the Living Commons without noticing much of the people there. They registered as background noise and visual static, only enough he could avoid walking into them while he went over the schematic he had spent the morning designing for the new reactor the scientist wanted built. He loved the work, but new designs were draining, especially when the scientists wanted something that theory said wasn't possible. There was only so much heat the material could withstand before they broke down, and it wasn't like chemical science could invent a new heat-dissipating compound just because the scientists weren't interested in bothering with things like thermals. So he had to come up with a sound. The sound registered as his moving foot felt the resistance, and Jeremy stepped back in startlement, and he didn't know why else. Other than the creature sitting on the floor and looking up at him was a cat. It meowed at him in what seemed to him to be both plaintive and threatening sound. His imagination, he was certain of it. After all, it was nothing more than a cat, a mottled one in orange, white, and black. In white, orange, and black. He looked around. What was a cat doing on this deck? What was he doing on the living quarterdeck? He thought back. Oh, his thoughts back. Okay, his thoughts back to how we'd come here were interrupted by another meow. The cat stepped in his direction and Jeremy stepped back. He had no interest in letting the thing any closer than he had to. Its owner had to be somewhere around. No one paid it or him any attention, each too busy with their own thoughts. The cat plopped down on its ass and meowed again. Definitely a threat in that sound. He should step around and get on his way. If he wanted a chance to meet his friends for lunch, he had to get there before lunch was actually over. That was why he was on this deck. None of his friends were technicians, so it was more convenient for any of them to meet up. It was more convenient to meet up for food here, more or less halfway between all their jobs on the station. He reached for the thing. He fought the flinch as it stretched so its head touched his palm and moved his hand further until he took a solid grasp of its nape and lifted it. As much as he didn't care for cats, he couldn't leave it here and to be stepped on. He didn't remember where he'd learned this, but he knew this was the only safe way to hold one of these things. He headed for the archway on the wall. It would be one of the lounges peppering the living floor. Someone would know what to do with it, might even know who it belonged to. Scrabbles? A childish voice called, causing people to look in the opposite direction from where Jeremy was heading. Scrabbles? Where are you, you naughty boy? Jeremy looked at the cat, unmoving in his grip, other than to give him a look that promised retribution once it was free. The voice had called for a naughty boy, so that had to be Scrabbles. He wasn't putting himself through the indignity of checking its gender. Scrabbles, come back here or you're not getting any dessert. Jeremy made his way through the crowd until he saw the caller, a girl who couldn't be older than 10. Is this yours? What was she doing out of class at this hour? Or were they let out for lunch? He'd gone to school on Earth, and it had been nearly an hour's travel away, so lunch was taken there. Here? He didn't even know where the classes were given. Were they even communal? He was pretty sure it hadn't been an Earth-only custom. But he was so far from there, so close to other races, maybe they did things differently here. What did it say about him that after 5 years on the research station, he knew nothing about how families lived? Gimme! The girl's arms were extended in his direction, impatience visible on her face. As soon as the cat was in her arm, it struggled to get out of them, clearly intent on making him pay for the part he played in the indignity. But she tightened her hold while Jeremy rejoined the crowd to head for the floor's dining hall. Jeremy looked around the half-filled room as his order printed. No one he knew was present. Not that it was surprising. He hadn't realized it worked well into his friend's lunch hour, so that they'd have returned. So they'd have returned to work, already returned to work, if they had even come. He hadn't messaged anyone to find out who was eating here today. He just hoped some of them would. He took his tray when the dispenser opened, and a long swallow of his perfect temperatured coffee, before scanning the room again, picking a table with no one sitting at it, as well as free tables around it. A perfect spot of solitude to get more work done while he ate, since he was alone. He'd barely started on his steak, his tablet resting next to the tray with the latest version of the schematic for the reactor. He'd barely started on his steak, his tablet resting next to the tray with the latest version of the schematic for the reactor. That someone sat opposite him. "Hi, Jeremy," she greeted him. He looked at her, fork nearly to his mouth, then at the empty tables around them. "Hi," he finally said, out of politeness. She knew his name, so he had to have met her somewhere. "How's your stomach?" "It's fine," he replied, doing a mental check of how it felt. It was rare, but at times simply having the fact he had gastrointestinal trouble being brought up was enough to upset it. That she knew about it meant they'd more than met. There was a vague air of familiarity to her short blonde hair and blue eyes and freckles on her cheeks. A friend of one of his friends? He did his best to remember them when introduced, but unlike him, most of his friends had large social circles. "I'm Maria," she said in a tone that said he should know his name. He should know the name. Not a woman who had hit on him before. He made sure to remember those so he could avoid them when his "I'm too busy for work" response to their invitation for entertainment wasn't enough. He felt it was more polite than "You just aren't my type." "Maria," he said with a snap of the finger, and continued as her expression turned sour. "Level 6 theater. You said hello while me and my friends were waiting for the Cats on the High to start playing. Sorry, I'm bad with faces." "It's okay," she replied demurely. "I guess a guy like you always has to deal with women approaching him." He kept his expression neutral while trying to figure out what he was supposed to do with that statement. "What did you think of the movie?" "I thought it was a little dull myself." Me and my friend had a hoot. He grinned. "I love those kind of comedies." "Oh, I love them too. It's just that this one was..." He gave her time to find the words. What is that?" She twisted her head to get a better view of his tablet. "Work," he replied with a chuckle. "You work in the labs, right?" She smiled at him. "I'm just a tech." Who had told her that? He was confident that his work hadn't come up during that conversation. His stomach had. That was why she knew about that. Lots of people close together sometimes upset it. And he hadn't brought his medication. Maybe she'd ask one of the others? It wasn't like his work was secret or anything. That doesn't look like the kind of thing a tech would get access to. What is it? "The schematic to a piece of equipment I'm designing for one of the team of scientists." For a team of scientists. "And you said you were just a tech." She laughed lightly, and he shrugged. "What are you doing here?" he asked after she kept looking at him in silence. "Eating lunch and talking with you. I mean, here on the station." "Oh, I'm in administration," she replied dismissively. Jeremy frowned. Do you live in this section? Oh no, I'm in S21. You? Aren't both of these far from here? Realization, surprise, or, oh, I guess I'm busted. I think you are, he replied neutrally. There was no way this was espionage. Even with its large civilian population, the research station was military. No one came here that wasn't vetted thoroughly. He'd filled form for hours before he'd been allowed to set his first trip date for his ship to the station. Even then, it had been 9 interviews in front of intimidating men. It felt like he was being questioned for a crime instead of to come work on this station. And that was with Dr. Armand Manuel hiring him directly. Somehow his thesis design for a theoretical antimatter generator had made its way to her, and she'd offered him a position as an engineer on the most advanced antimatter research station based solely on that. When he'd thrown up in the middle of his first interview, he'd been certain he'd lost a job, and the concern, when he'd explained about his stress-induced stomach trouble, hadn't smoothed his worry away. He had reassured them he had medication. He just hadn't brought it because he hadn't expected this to be as stressful as it was. He had it for his next one, and they went better. The truth is, she said, then let the silence stretch. Your friend told me you often eat lunch here. When I asked him about you after the movie, I've been working up the courage to stop by and say hi since then. She smiled. Hi. Which friend? It had been his entire circle of friends, him and the 6 of them, and Jeremy wasn't amused that one of them had given her details about his schedule. Oh, I don't remember his name. The doctor. Omar. Of course it was Omar. His friends was always after him to live it up, on him to do more than work, to meet women, to have fun. He told him that he was here to work, not party, and that once he met a woman he connected with, he'd happily let things happen. Of course, Omar, having a hand in this, also told him what she was after. Look, I'm sorry Omar led you to think I would. The flashing red bar on the top of his tablet was accompanied by a soft but distinct alarm tone. I'm sorry, I'm needed at the lab. He took his tablet and the tray with his still nearly full plate. He dropped the tray in the recycler. Once in the corridor, he pulled the earpiece out of his tablet and applied it behind his ear. Yanth, what's happening? I have heat readout that just crossed the line. The things might be heading towards bad threshold out of the reactor in laboratory 8. That's Amanda's work, he replied, not slowing. She left for Earth this morning. Then have the team running the test on it shut it down. They laughed. What do you mean they laughed? They weren't done with the reactor. According to the report, they terminated the test before leaving. And what does the shutdown procedure report say? They logged say that everything's green. If everything's green, we wouldn't have an increase in increasing temperatures. He picked up the pace. I'm three floors down. I'll be there as soon as I can. He heard her smile. Then I will let the temperature know to keep the climb up as slow as possible. And that concludes chapter 2 of The Captain's Heart. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter is going to be up, subscribe. Hit the bell. If you want to read this story, it is up on Ream Story, as well as my Patreon. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. And, yep, links are in the notes. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.